Redditors who were almost murdered. What's your story? I was a clerk at an appliance repair shop. Some guy had brought his riding lawnmower in to be worked on, but decided it cost too much to have it repaired, so my boss asked me to load it up in our lift truck and drive it to his address. I was 17 and had my relatively newly minted license on me, so it felt like a big responsibility and I was happy to do it. I loaded it up just fine and drove to his address. When I started to unload, I noticed that the battery was unattached. One of the technicians must have removed it to work on something. Unfortunately, I had no tools to put it back in. I checked the work order and it said, "Customer declined repair, needs replacement engine." So I thought, he won't care because the engine is dead anyway. I rang the doorbell and this fat, drunk guy with no shirt opens the door suddenly. I had lowered the riding lawnmower off the truck and pushed it into his yard. He yells, "What the hell are you leaving me that pile of junk in my yard for?" I said, "Is this not your riding lawnmower?" He says, "Hell yes, it's mine, but it's in pieces and I don't want the damn thing. What the hell is wrong with you people?" So I apologize and ask him if he wants me to load it back up. I don't know what else to say. For some unknown reason, this pissed him off even more, and he disappeared back into his house. I go back to the truck to radio my boss, this was in the days before cell phones, to see what she wanted me to do. In the meantime, that drunk bastard stomps out onto his porch with a shoddy, leveled it at the truck and pulled the trigger. The windshield shattered, and I literally couldn't hear anything but ringing from the noise. I jumped in the truck, started it up, put it in reverse, and floored it out of his driveway, almost going into the ditch on the other side of the road. He fires again, this time hitting the passenger side of the truck near the door, blowing the shrapnel into the cab of the truck, which hit my leg and cut me a bit. I flew back to work faster than I had ever driven before, called my mom and dad, and told my boss I was never coming back to work there again. The cops came and took my statement, arrested the idiot, and I had to testify against him a few months later, despite desperately never wanting to see him again. He only spent about 6 months in prison for it. Luckily, by the time things were settled, I had moved away to college and didn't have to worry about him anymore. Story 2. I was 13 years old. My friend and I were out skateboarding, and for some reason this one woman got really angry that we skated on the sidewalk in front of her house. She began screaming incoherently, and we just laughed it off and kept going. My friend went one way and I went another. A minute later, I am still just riding on the sidewalk to get back to my house, when all of a sudden, the woman yelling from before pulls up beside me in her car, and she starts screaming again. Full disclosure, I did reply with some expletives and told her to get away. I continued riding and she just drove slowly beside me while continuing to scream. The woman eventually drove off, but then she did a U-turn and came back towards me. I expected her to just pass by and go home, but then I noticed she was driving directly at me. I froze and just watched her car come at me. Eventually, my brain decided it had to move. It was literally like a movie, and I dove away just as the car drove over where I was standing. I don't know her exact speed, but if I had to guess, 30 to 40 miles per hour. She just continued driving and I sprinted home. She was later arrested and pled guilty to assault with a deadly weapon with intent to unalive. Story 3. When I was in high school, a random new kid started stalking me, like following me home from school, and I would see him outside of my house. And he would also stand by my locker at school. He was weird. Told my counselor, but they didn't really believe me. Told the teacher I was close with, and he talked to the principal. They said they would watch out. After about a week, my boyfriend was unhappy the school wasn't helping me. He confronted this kid and they almost physically fought. Finally, he got kicked out of school, and about a month later, less than 3 miles from my house, he strangled a girl my age, who also went to my school, and dumped her body in a field. Story 4. My ex and I got into an argument because he had become abusive, and I told him I was going to tell his family what he'd been doing. He got so angry at that he tried to grab me, but I ran out of the room. He headed for the gun closet, so went outside to make sure that when he unalived me, the neighbors would see it. I called 911 outside, and for some lucky reason, they were just blocks away. When they got there, he was in the middle of loading the Remy 700. I pressed charges and he only got 1 night in jail. His dad bailed him out, and despite me getting a 5-year restraining order, I would run into him around town. He pled no contest and got 3 years probation. That's it. I moved 3,000 miles away but still fear him. What an absolute justice system failure. Also, what's even going on in his head? He's like, "Oh, you're gonna tell my family I'm abusive? Oh, I'll shoot you. That'll show that I'm not." I don't get it. What a weird guy, and I'm so sorry the justice system failed you here, OP. Story 5. I was a freshman in college and in my first semester, pledged a fraternity. One night I was assigned to work the door at a party, which was not uncommon. At around 1:30 to 2 a.m., a group of guys that worked at the dining hall, I remembered because he made an amazing cheesesteak, showed up and paid $5 per cup. A few minutes after they paid, the last keg kicked and none of them got any beer. As soon as they told me that the kegs just kicked, I started counting out cash to pay them back for the cups they bought. Before I could get them their money, one of my drunk pledge brothers decided to physically force them out the door while yelling and talking crap. As soon as I could calm my buddy down, I went outside to give them their cash back, only to be met with a big surprise. When I made it down the back steps, Cheesesteak Guy aggressively steps forward and says, "Y'all made a big frickin' mistake. I'm strapped." Pulls a handgun out of his waistband and points it directly between my eyes. It was remarkable that 18-year-old me didn't crap my pants immediately. A few of the older guys in the house stepped outside and were able to talk the guy down without incident, but it felt like I had that gun pointed between my eyes for an eternity. Long story short, I was incredibly lucky that I didn't get shot that night. Needless to say, I went without cheesesteaks for a few semesters after that night. Story 6. When I was 19, I dated a girl whose dad was a psycho, was probably just over 5 feet tall, but all muscle. Did a bunch of time in prison for drugs and violent crimes. Once had a guy cut him off in traffic, followed the guy and finally boxed him in, tore his car door open, and held a knife to the guy's crotch, threatening to cut his dong off until the guy wet himself. It's that level of crazy. Didn't find out most of this until after the fact, though. Me and her lived together in an apartment. I worked afternoons, she worked days. There were a couple hours in the afternoon when no one was there. Had a day off one day and was running some errands. Came home in that time frame when no one was normally home, and her father came walking out of our bedroom. I asked him what he was doing there, and he told me because he liked me, he would be honest. He said he was there to rob us. He was on drugs and was in the middle of a crime spree. Held up a bunch of people in the complex who were entering or leaving the building. Then came through our bedroom window. He said he looked around and didn't find anything, so he was on his way out. He said that he wouldn't hurt me, but if I ever told anyone this happened, including his daughter, I would disappear, and no one would ever find me. Then he walked out. The whole time he was talking to me, all I could think of was, don't give him a reason to attack me. That, and I had a coffee cup in the living room with almost $1,000 in it. Thankfully, he didn't find that. I never saw him again. My relationship was on the rocks, and this gave me the needed push to get out of there. I never told anyone what happened until after he died. Well, at least he was honest with you. That's, sweet. Story 7. I've told this before, but I witnessed a murder directly in front of me while I was sitting in my Jeep with the top down. 2 guys were arguing on the sidewalk. I was just sitting there. They knew I was there and didn't care. One guy pulled out a homemade shank from his pant leg and straight-armed it into the other guy's eye. I will never forget the crunching sound when that blade went into his face. The murderer looked at me once and bolted. I ran up to help, but the guy was screwed. Blood spouting out of his eye in gushes, and he was moaning horribly. He died as the ambulance arrived. I was the only witness and nearly testified in court, but the guy pled guilty and got 15 to 25 years. Still have nightmares about that 25 years later. Story 8. So I was backpacking in South America and was getting a bus between cities in Brazil. As you may know, night buses are routinely robbed, and I was unlucky enough to be on a bus at this time. Being the only foreign person on the bus, they obviously rinsed me dry. Passport, cash, phone, all gone. I was then locked in the luggage compartment till they had left the scene, all while having a gun pointed at me. Now that sucked. What sucked even more was a week later when I was getting another bus, it was robbed again. And again, they went straight to the only foreign person on the bus, who didn't speak much Portuguese and demanded all the stuff the previous robbers stole off of me. I was pretty much crying with a gun in my face as I had nothing to give them. They took me outside the bus and I thought for sure this is how it ends. But again, they locked me in the luggage compartment while they robbed everyone else. I booked flights from then on. It took the second time to make that decision, OP. Like, I get it. The first time it happens, you're like, oh, yeah, I never thought it would happen to me. But after the first time, come on. Story 9. I was working at a gas station. It was at night and slow, so I was sitting in the office watching TV. All of a sudden, one guy comes in behind me and another guy comes in front of me. Guy in front says, "Don't get up." I give him the wad of cash from my breast pocket and then the money from my front pocket. They rush out back into the darkness. I stay put, just like the guy said. Then I call the owner. The car pulls up to get gas. I tell them they need to pay by credit card or exact change because I just got robbed. Then I reach up to touch my neck. It was bloody. The guy in the back was holding a knife to my throat. Story 10. This is my aunt's story, but it's too good not to share. My aunt was almost unalived by the famous serial murderer, Michael Swango, the killer doctor. She worked as a unit secretary at the ward he worked in regularly, and they knew each other well. Part of his routine was poisoning people he worked with, and he admitted after he was caught, he was planning on getting her too. But his coworkers got suspicious of him and he left town before he had the chance. Story 11. I was getting screamed at by my ex as usual. I don't remember what I said or did, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me off the couch. He started hitting me, not the first time. I had never seen him so angry, and I'd long since taught myself to not react and give him the feeling of having power over me. If I didn't cry, he would eventually get bored and stop. Next thing I know, he pushes me up against the wall and wraps his hand around my throat. I was having a hard time breathing, but I still wouldn't cry. Just as I was about to pass out, I gathered all my strength and punched him in the ribs as hard as I could. He dropped me, and before I could catch my breath, I hit him in the balls. When he was down, I kicked him in the ribs a couple times and locked myself in the bathroom until he came and started his usual apologies. I knew I needed to get out, and 2 weeks later, I did. It's been 8 years. Story 12. I was coming home from a bachelor party at 2 a.m., and on the way home I realized we all had forgotten the steak dinner portion of the evening that we had all planned. I didn't want to wake up my wife and baby drunkenly rummaging around the kitchen, so I had a taxi drop me off at the Dunkin' Donuts a half-mile from my house. This was pre-Uber times. I got myself a couple of egg and cheese bagels and started walking home. Now, I made sure to take the quieter neighborhood street rather than the busier street in order to make sure to avoid potential drunk drivers. However, about a block into the neighborhood, I see a pair of dudes coming my way down the sidewalk. I consider crossing the street, but realize how insulting that would be to the two men clearly just walking home from a fun evening just like me. When they're a few feet away, I give them a how you doing nod, and they returned it with their own. I was so proud of my decision to treat them like fellow bros and not be so suspicious. Then, as they walk past me, one of them pulls his hand up in the air, holding a tire iron, and strikes me in the back of the head. Hard. I fall into the street from the impact but remain conscious. One holds my arms down while the other climbs on my legs and starts rifling through my pockets. I tell them to take what they want, and they tell me to shut up or they will end me. Then they ask me where my wallet is, and when I tell them which pocket it's in, they tell me to shut up or they'll end me again. They took my wallet, phone, and watch, and then kicked me a few more times in the head and then took off. I was bleeding and super concussed and without a phone at 2:30 a.m. There was no way I could make it home on my own. I saw a house nearby where the flickering light of a TV could be seen in an upstairs bedroom, and I crawled over. I pulled myself up onto the porch and leaned against the door and knocked and hollered for help. The homeowner was rightfully scared and didn't want to open the door at that hour for a stranger who wouldn't even stand up to be seen through his front door's viewfinder. I was feeling very faint at this point and was covered in blood from the head wound, but convinced him to call 911 and get an ambulance. I also asked if he could call my wife. At that point, he seemed to be more confident that I was not trying to trick him. He offered me a cordless phone through a chained door. He said he wanted to help, but I needed to stay out on the porch because he had just redone his floors and I was bleeding way too much. When the EMTs arrived, they decided they should take me to the better hospital instead of the one a few blocks away. But the route to the other hospital required several blocks of driving on cobblestones. An experience I would not recommend to any concussed individual strapped to a gurney in the back of an ambulance. I needed 24 staples in my head, and the doctors all told me I was lucky to have survived such a massive blow to the head with a blunt object. But the sad part? I never actually got my egg and cheese bagels. Story 13. I was staying at the Extended Stay America in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota in the summer of 2018. Had my dog outside to go to the bathroom, and as I was walking her back inside, a car pulls up and stops. Just before I can open the door, I hear, "Hey, nice dog." I turn around and see some dude step out and literally pull out a knife. I don't say a word. Tell my dog to jump, grab her mid-jump, run inside, and slam the door shut, breaking the lock into the engaged position in the process. The building was, and still is, incredibly worn down, and barely held together with toothpick-level materials. I wind sprint to my room and unlock the door with the card key. Just as I walk in, I look out the exterior window in the hallway and see the dude actually looking into the building to presumably see which room I'm staying in. I get into my room, lock the door behind me, call the front desk, and simply say that the back door to the building's lock is busted. Oh, and that also some dude in the back area parking lot is walking around with a knife. I just heard the clerk say, "Again? Alright, I'll call the police in." Story 14. When I was young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, my family lived in a small town of about 1,200 people. It was mostly a farming town. My dad was the manager of the only bank in town. A farmer missed some payments on a loan, so the bank foreclosed and took his farm. This farmer apparently blamed my father personally, so he went to the bank with a rifle and threatened my father. My father talked to him, cops were called, and the farmer was arrested and arraigned. Bail was posted for the farmer, so he was released from jail. A few days later, my family was eating dinner and we heard a truck pull up and park in front of our house. It was a really quiet street in a small town, so my father went up to the front window to see who pulled up. It was the farmer, and this time, he had a shotgun. He walked right up to the front door and knocked, and my family busted ass out the back door and ran to a neighbor's house. Our front door was unlocked, so he could have opened it and blasted us all, but I guess he didn't think to check it. Cops were again called and the farmer was arrested again. My family spent the next week or so in a hotel a few towns away, until it was assured that the farmer would be in jail without the possibility of bail. Story 15. My ex-stepfather is bipolar. After my mom left him, he had another manic episode. He broke in and pulled a gun on us, told me to go to my room and not call the police. I was 11. I called the police. When they pulled up, he shot through the door to my bedroom and emptied the clip. I had already grabbed my cat and was outside under the deck. I am just glad he shot the door and not my mom. My half-sister was born later that year. At her funeral, he showed up and kept trying to talk to me. He couldn't understand why I refused. He was never charged and has no memory of the incident. He spent a weekend at a mental hospital and then was released to go to work as a teacher. I don't understand how all this was ignored and he was considered an upstanding teacher and person. Story 16. I was about 18, female, and just moved to the city for university. Driving near downtown and I see police lights behind me. I pulled over and a man in plain clothes gets out of an unmarked car. And when he's close to my window, I see another man getting out of the passenger side, also in plain clothes, walking up to the other side of my car. I freaked out and floored it out of there. I think I ran over their foot. Then I went the wrong way down several one-way streets, and ended up driving an hour away in one direction because I was afraid they would follow me. I called the police to make sure they hadn't actually pulled me over, which they hadn't. They never found the guys. Story 17. Probably too late to the party, but I'll give it a go. Was a firefighter for 15 or so years. As a rookie, I responded to a smell of natural gas call. Fairly calming call. Usually just stand around with the lights flashing until the gas company shows up. To this day, it is still the most gas, volume-wise, I've experienced in a residential setting. Could smell gas from the cab of the engine from 5 blocks out. Anyway, long story short, 2 of us, firefighters and 2 cops, ended up making entry into the residence the gas appeared to be coming from. We were able to wedge open the basement entry garage doors, old school flip-up style doors. 4 of us marched single file into the dark garage to a door in the back corner that led into the basement. The only gear I had on was my boots and bunker pants. It was hot outside. Anyway, the amount of gas in the garage was almost overwhelming. The door into the basement had a glass window, and the lead officer was using his flashlight to look around inside as he opened up the door. Right as the lead officer was yanking the door open, he spotted someone inside and started yelling. We all rushed in, and it was dark and really humid, crazy amount of natural gas. Could hear it hissing in. I think I was third in line. Only got maybe 3 steps in before colliding with the 2 officers in front of me who had stopped up short. I remember the lead officer just plainly stated in a kind of defeated tone, "He has a lighter." Definitely one of those moments where 3 or 4 seconds feels like an eternity. But sure enough, in the back corner of this basement, slumped over in a ratty old recliner, was a middle-aged, skinny dude with an orange Bic lighter. And that jerk flicked that thing at least twice while I was looking at it. I assume he had flicked it once or twice before, which is what caught the officer's attention. Anyway, the 4 of us just kind of stood there like idiots, staring at this dude in his recliner for what felt like forever, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I remember distinctly wondering how big of a crater was going to be left behind. Obviously, nothing happened. Once our fight or flight worked its way out, the 4 of us collectively kind of bum-rushed the dude. He didn't put up much of a fight, and I was surprised to find him nearly unconscious. We had to carry him out. Dude had busted open the main gas line feeding his house where it entered his basement. He had left a note and everything. He was completely unconscious for the ride to the hospital. Medics stuck an NPA in and I bagged him the entire way. And I'm not sure if he intended to try and take others with him either. I actually think the concentration of gas was too high, above the UEL of natural gas, which I think is around 15%. The basement, or at least the area immediately around the recliner, was essentially flooded with too much fuel and not enough O2 to ignite. I was definitely a little lightheaded after spending what was likely less than a minute in the basement. Learned a lot of valuable lessons that day that I tried to pay forward. It is very lucky that no one in that neighborhood smoked, because I can only assume it would have gone kaboom. Plenty of O2 out in the open air. Very lucky for everyone involved in that though. I'm glad that it seemed to go without incident.